Okay, so for this video, I'm just going to cover the Freudian section of personality, so the psychoanalytic perspective. So just Freud and his ideas of personality will be in this video. So to start with Freud, Freud is important to personality because mostly just for his historical contribution to psychology. So Freud, his view of personality is not so much held today. There are concepts of his theories that are still carried out through psychodynamic psychologists, but a lot of Freud's ideas are still taught for the historical impact they had on psychology. So to start with Sigmund Freud, his perspective of psychology is called the psychoanalytic perspective. So he focuses primarily on the unconscious mind and its role in how you act and how you think and how you behave, and that you have this element of you that you are not aware of, that within your mind you have these unconscious conflicts and drives that are pulling you and pushing you to act and behave in ways that you don't necessarily realize are going on behind the scenes. Freud says that your personality develops from birth and it starts with the id. So if you can see on the iceberg, the id is underneath. It's underneath the water and just symbolizing that this is a part of you that you don't see or even realize. It is the unconscious part of who you are. And as you develop, you start to grow other aspects of your mind and your consciousness and your drives, but your id is what starts. And so your id is the primal part of you, of your inner drives and desires that are pushing you to act and feel and behave in ways that are pleasure seeking. And so if you think of a child is acting and thinking and feeling. Even a baby, an infant, is doing things out of just I want or I need, and doesn't really have any kind of like suppression on its desires and needs. And so that's how the id acts. And it's this part of you that's pushing you to just indulge in your desires. Your superego would be the other end of the spectrum. This is something you develop as you understand societal expectations and right and wrong, and your superego is the part of your unconscious mind that is pushing you to make the right or moral or ethical decision. This is something that through parental guidance and teachers and education and just everything is teaching you what's right and wrong. The superego embodies that in your unconscious mind and is trying to push you to make the best decision, the most right decision. Your ego is the reality principle that's just kind of mediating in your mind and trying to go between, am I going to go with my pleasures and am I going to indulge in what I want right now, or am I going to do what is right and go with my super ego that's telling me this is what is right. And so your ego is constantly mediating between these two inner poles, and Freud says most of this is happening without your conscious focus or awareness. Freud will often try to get out these unconscious conflicts through free association, which is where he would have people just talk about how they're thinking and feeling, and trying to get these unconscious conflicts to come out through just conversation and having them talk. And he would call that free association, where he would try to make connections with just their trivial conversation and try to pull out these unconscious conflicts they're having. Okay, so Freud would say that the ego is sometimes trying to cope with this stress and anxiety and conflicts that the person is having, and they can do that through defense mechanisms. And defense mechanisms are just this way of dealing with the anxiety. And underlying all defense mechanisms is repression. So this is the foundational defense mechanism of just like pushing something back into the unconscious. So if something is stressful or there is some conflict, repression just means that one way to cope is just to push it out of conscious awareness. There's all kinds of other defense mechanisms, and I'll just go through some of these. Denial would be just acting like or refusing to admit whatever that conflict is. Projection is where you have some kind of just feelings about yourself or things you're uncomfortable with, and rather than you admitting or dealing with those, you would project those feelings onto someone else and say, maybe you would accuse them of those same feelings, or you would blame them, but you're taking how you feel and you don't feel like okay with those, and so rather than revealing that or admitting to it, you just project your feelings and you say it's, you know, someone else. Displacement would be if you were you have some kind of feeling that you're uncomfortable with, maybe it's aggression or frustration, and rather than taking it out on the source, you take it out on something that is maybe a safer outlet. And so rather than like taking out your aggressive, you know, frustration on your boss, you take it out onto your son or your dog or something that is like a safer outlet, something that you won't take it out on your boss, you'll take it on something that has less consequences. Regression would be to go into a more juvenile or infantile stage, like dealing with the stress, you start to suck your thumb or throw a temper tantrum. Sublimation is really similar to displacement, but you're taking out that unacceptable feeling on something that is socially acceptable. So like rather than punching your boss, you punch a punching bag because that is more socially acceptable or constructive. Next, Freud, this is something that especially Neo-Freudians, they criticize Freud's psychosexual stages. Freud says, and he said that children, and he focused primarily on children, develop through fixation stages where they fixate on part of the body. And if they don't develop well through that stage, maybe they get stuck in that stage and they get fixated on that body part. And so as babies are growing their erogenous zone, or where they're fixated at, it's their mouth, and toddlers and young children, their fixation is on their bowels and their bladder, and so he calls that the anal stage. And fixation would be like getting stuck in that area. If you get stuck in this age that is for a 1 to 3 year old, that you're focused on your bowels, you could fixate and get stuck in that anal stage. The phallic stage, this is where little kids are really focused on their genitals. Like, you know, you might see a little kid with their hand in their pants and not, you know, doing anything, you know, weird or malicious. They're just feeling things, you know, and so he would call that the phallic stage. This is also where he said that boys and girls go through this complex where they love their mother or they love their father. The Oedipus complex is where little boys desire their mothers. And Freud would say that they desire their mothers and they fear their fathers because of that competition they have from their father, and vice versa. The Electra complex would be that little girls, they desire their father and they fear their mother. And so as we move through the latent stage, latent or latency means hidden, and so between this like 6 to puberty, he would say that kids are not like focused on any, you know, body part per se, that this like sexual urge is hidden, and so that's why he calls it the latent stage. The final stage is the genital stage, which would be about puberty, and this is where he would say that children are going through these adolescent stage of sexual maturity, and that's their final stage. And so this is where he is also critiqued by many people, and even his followers to come. And so that's where we're going to go next, onto Neo-Freudians, who are people who followed Freud, who still held to some of his principles of the unconscious mind. They critiqued him a lot in areas where he focused a lot on this fixation of on body parts and the sexual development of children. They also really criticized his, especially Karen Horney criticized his just maybe lack of understanding of women. And so she developed what would be called more of a feminist view on psychology. But Neo-Freudians are called psychodynamic psychologists, who still take some of Freud's ideas and then build upon them. Alfred Adler, his primary idea that he brings forward is that children, that one of their conflicts that they go through, this unconscious conflict that they go through, is a feeling of inferiority. And so this is where we get the term inferiority complex. And so he one of his focuses was learning about how does feeling inferior impact children and adults, and this idea of inferiority complexes. Karen Horney is important to psychology a lot for what she brings to her criticisms of Freud, and she brings an approach to the unconscious mind, but also to bring women into the picture, and that they are not this like a dark area that Freud describes them and leaves them out, and she develops this feminist psychology. Carl Jung. Carl Jung is responsible for the part of the unconscious mind that he calls the collective unconscious, that we have this part of us, this unconscious mind that also links us, that is passed down to us through our species, that we actually have this collective unconscious mind together. And he also developed these ideas of extroversion, these ideas of traits of extroversion. Okay, so what you need to know about Freud, make sure that you really remember that he is focused on the unconscious mind, and that drives a lot of his ideas. Neo-Freudians or psychodynamic psychologists also focus on the unconscious mind, but they criticize Freud a lot for some of his other ideas. And so that's what they bring to personality.